"Just kill me fast," she said. The Apache opened the sack and time itself seemed to stop cold. The sun was setting low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dry desert landscape. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying with it the scent of dust and the faint smell of smoke from distant fires. For the Apache woman, the journey had been long and harsh, filled with pain, loss, and endless struggle. Her once proud and powerful spirit had been worn down by captivity. And now, she walked with a heavy heart and an even heavier burden. She was no stranger to hardship. As a warrior of the Apache tribe, she had known battle, bravery, and pride. She had been part of many raids, fought against enemy soldiers, and defended her people with every ounce of strength. But that was before the raids had stopped, before the world outside her village had grown cold and indifferent, before her world had turned upside down. Now she was a captive, taken by those who saw her as nothing more than a commodity, an object to be sold or discarded. She had been captured in the midst of a raid, and in the chaos her tribe had been torn apart. The men who took her had no understanding of the life she had once known. To them, she was just another prisoner, another person to be used. But she was more than that. She had been raised to be strong, to be a leader, to carry the traditions of her people. And yet, here she was, walking in chains, led by the very people who had stripped her of her freedom. The days felt endless. She was forced to march under the hot sun, her throat parched, her body exhausted. There were no words exchanged between her and her captors. They did not speak her language, and she would not speak theirs. The silence was her only ally, and in that silence she allowed her mind to wander. She thought of her people, the Apache tribe that had once roamed free in the mountains and deserts of the Southwest. She remembered the faces of her family, the laughter of the children, the strength of the warriors. Those days seemed so far away now. The freedom she had once known felt like a dream, a distant memory that she could hardly grasp. The nights were the hardest. At least during the day there was something to focus on. The endless road, the marching, the harsh commands of her captors. But at night, in the cold, dark silence, her thoughts would return to her tribe, to her home, to everything she had lost. She had seen others break under the pressure of captivity, their spirits shattered, their will to survive gone. She had seen men and women lose their sense of identity, their sense of self. But not her. She would not let them take that from her. She was an Apache woman, and no matter what they did to her, they would not take away who she was. One night as she lay on the hard ground, her mind racing with thoughts of escape, she heard something that made her heart skip a beat, a faint noise, a rustle in the distance. She lifted her head, straining to hear. Was it the wind, or something more? For a moment there was nothing but silence. But then she heard it again. Footsteps, soft but steady, moving closer. Her heart beat faster now, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She knew that if she moved, if she made a sound, it could be the end of her. But she couldn't just lie there. She had to know what was out there. Slowly, carefully, she shifted her position, trying not to make a sound. The moonlight cast long shadows across the camp, and through the darkness, she saw a figure moving towards her. It was a man, dressed in the same rough clothing as her captors, but something about him was different. There was an air of uncertainty about him, a hesitation in his steps. He was alone. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched him approach. Could he be one of her own people sent to rescue her? Or was he another enemy, another one of her captors? She couldn't tell. But she knew one thing. This was her chance. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that could change everything. As the man drew closer, he stopped and looked down at her. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment everything else seemed to disappear. She saw the hesitation in his gaze, the uncertainty in his posture. He wasn't sure if he should help her, if he should act. But in that split second, she knew what she had to do. Her voice, hoarse from days of silence, barely escaped her lips. "Just kill me fast," she whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She didn't know why she said them. Maybe it was because she had nothing left to lose. Maybe it was because the weight of everything she had endured had finally become too much to bear. Or maybe it was because, in that moment, she felt that death would be a release, a way to escape the torment of her life. But the man's reaction was not what she expected. He didn't move. He didn't raise a weapon or strike her down. Instead, he kneeled beside her, his face etched with a deep sadness. He looked at her as if he understood something that no one else had. It was as if he saw her pain, her exhaustion, and her fear. And for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. But hope was a dangerous thing, especially for someone like her. She knew that hope could lead to disappointment, and disappointment could lead to more suffering. But she also knew that without hope, survival was impossible. The man didn't say anything. He simply reached into his coat and pulled something out. A small weathered pouch. He opened it carefully, and inside he revealed something that made her heart race. It was a knife. A simple, sharp blade. For a moment the world seemed to slow down. The sack she had been carrying, the one filled with her possessions, seemed to weigh heavier than ever. She wondered what would happen next, what this man's actions would mean for her. Would he end her suffering, or would he help her survive? The wind picked up again, carrying with it a sense of uncertainty. The night seemed colder now, and for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of something deep inside her, a reminder of the strength she once had. The moment stretched on, and as the man looked down at her, she saw something else in his eyes, a kind of quiet understanding. He knew that she was no ordinary captive, no simple prisoner. She was a warrior, a survivor. And in that moment they both knew that whatever happened next would change their lives forever. The man knelt beside her, his expression unreadable, as the Apache woman lay there, eyes fixed on the small knife he held in his hand. The silence between them stretched thick and heavy. But it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. It was not a silence born of fear or uncertainty. It was the silence of two people who understood each other in a way that few could ever comprehend. The woman had expected something different, perhaps the cold, indifferent end she had been preparing herself for. But instead this man, this stranger, had not acted as she thought he would. He had not brought her death. He had brought her something else, a moment of unexpected compassion, something she had almost forgotten could exist in the world. For a few moments the man just looked at her, and she studied him in return. He was not like the others, those who had taken her captive, who saw her as nothing more than a prize or a piece of land to be claimed. This man had a different energy about him, a quiet, unspoken understanding. His eyes held a depth that told of a life lived through hardship, a life that had seen both loss and survival. The woman's heart raced as she tried to make sense of this unexpected encounter. Her body was tired, so tired from the long days of captivity, from the endless march across harsh terrain, from the burning sun that never seemed to relent. Her muscles ached and her throat was dry. But it was more than that. It was the weight of her past, the loss of her people, the loss of her freedom. It was the haunting memory of her tribe, those she had loved, those she had fought beside, and those she had lost along the way. She had never imagined that she would end up here, a captive, her future uncertain. But in this moment, with this man before her, she was given something she had almost given up on: hope. The man's fingers tightened around the knife, his gaze still fixed on her. She could see the conflict in his eyes. This was not a man who took life easily. He wasn't like her captors, those who had no hesitation in their cruelty, those who had stripped her of everything she had once known. This man was different. He wasn't just a stranger to her. He was a reminder that there were still some people in this world who cared, even if only for a brief moment. Her voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. "Why?" she asked, her throat raw from lack of water and the strain of holding back the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "Why didn't you kill me?" Her words seemed to hang in the air, her heart pounding in her chest as she awaited his answer. The man's hand shook slightly as he lowered the knife. He didn't answer her immediately, and for a long moment he just sat there, staring at her, with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. "Because you're not ready to die," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. The woman blinked, taken aback by his words. Was she really not ready to die? She had thought for so long that death was the only way out, the only way to escape the pain and the suffering that had become her reality. But now, with this stranger before her, she felt a flicker of something else. Was it hope? Could it really be hope? "You've been through so much," the man continued, his voice filled with empathy. "But there's still something inside of you, something worth saving. You don't need to die, not like this. There's still life left in you, if you're willing to fight for it." The woman felt her breath catch in her throat. She had never thought of it that way before. To her, survival had seemed pointless. What was the point of surviving when everything she had known, everything she had loved, had been ripped away from her? What was the point of fighting for a life that had no meaning? She had been ready to let go, to give in to the darkness that had been consuming her. But this man, this stranger, was offering her something she hadn't expected. A choice. Her mind raced as she thought back on her journey. She had been taken from her village, forced to walk for miles through the harsh desert, deprived of food and water, her body pushed to its limits. She had seen others fall along the way, their bodies left behind like forgotten memories. She had watched as the world around her became nothing more than a blur of dust and despair. But still, she had kept going, even when the world seemed to close in around her. It wasn't just survival, though. She hadn't just kept moving out of a desire to stay alive. She had kept moving because she still remembered what it felt like to be free, to live without fear, to be part of something larger than herself. She remembered the laughter of the children, the bond of the warriors, the strength of her people. She remembered the freedom of the open land, the wind in her hair, and the sense of pride that came with knowing who she was. But that had been before. Before the raids, before the betrayal, before the destruction of everything she had known. Now, everything was different. Now she was just a prisoner, a pawn in someone else's game. But this man, he wasn't asking her to be a pawn. He was offering her a chance to fight, to take back what had been lost, to find her way back to something worth living for. For a moment she simply looked at him, unsure of what to say. Her heart was heavy with confusion, with the weight of all that had happened, and yet, in this moment, she found herself reaching for something she hadn't known she still had. Hope. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I don't have anything left." The man's eyes softened, and he reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You have yourself," he said quietly, "and sometimes that's all we need." Her breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. She had never thought of it that way before. All this time she had been focused on what she had lost, on the things she could never get back. But perhaps it wasn't about what she had lost. Perhaps it was about what she still had. The strength to keep going, the courage to survive, the will to fight for herself, even when everything else seemed hopeless. She looked at him again, and for the first time in a long while she saw something in his eyes that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still a future for her. It wasn't a perfect future, and it wasn't a future without pain, but it was a future where she could still be herself.
Where she could still fight. With a deep breath, she nodded.
"I'll fight," she said softly, her voice filled with a newfound determination. "I'll fight for my life." The man smiled, his expression gentle. "Then we'll fight together," he said, his voice firm. And in that moment something shifted inside the woman. It wasn't a promise of victory, and it wasn't a promise of a perfect life. But it was a promise to keep fighting, to keep moving forward, no matter what. And that, she realized, was all she really needed. The woman lay back on the ground, staring at the dark sky above. She could see the faintest outline of stars twinkling in the distance, but they seemed so far away, like something from another world. The night had a stillness to it, the kind that made every sound sharper, every movement more significant. She had been through so much in the past few days. Captivity, long walks across harsh terrain, the unrelenting thirst, and hunger. But now, with the decision to fight for her life, a strange calm seemed to have settled over her. The man who had knelt beside her, offering a glimmer of hope when she had been ready to give up, was no longer visible. He had left without a word, disappearing into the shadows as quietly as he had arrived. Yet something about his presence lingered, like a flicker of light in a room that had been dark for too long. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to be seen, to be given a choice, and yet here she was, feeling something she thought had been lost forever, the will to live. As she lay there, she could feel the weight of the sack beside her, the one she had carried throughout her journey. It had been with her through everything. The days of marching, the nights spent in cold, uncomfortable silence, the moments when she thought she might collapse from exhaustion. It was a small thing, a simple sack filled with what little she had left. But to her, it represented so much more. It was her connection to the world she had known, her tribe, and her past. She reached over and gently opened the sack, her fingers trembling slightly as she did. It wasn't much, just a few personal items, a handful of small treasures she had managed to keep through the ordeal. There were beads she had made herself, a small piece of cloth that had once been part of her mother's shawl, and a small knife, a tool that had been handed down through generations of Apache women. It wasn't a weapon of war, but it had been used for everything, preparing food, cutting thread for weaving, and sometimes, when necessary, defending oneself. It was part of who she was. Her fingers traced the edges of the knife, feeling the worn handle beneath her touch. It had been her mother's, and before that, her grandmother's. It was an object of strength, a symbol of the women in her family who had lived and fought with pride. Holding it now in this moment, she felt a small surge of power, a reminder that she was more than just a prisoner. She was Apache, and she had a history, a lineage that stretched back through generations. She was not just a captive, not just a woman left to suffer. She was a survivor. She sat up slowly, the weight of the sack still in her lap, her thoughts moving faster than her actions. Her mind wandered back to the moment when she had spoken those words to the man. Just kill me fast. She had meant them, in a way. She had been ready to die, to end the pain and uncertainty that had consumed her. But now, with the sack in her lap, with the weight of the knife in her hands, she could feel something else stirring within her. Was it hope? Was it the desire to fight? She wasn't sure, but whatever it was stronger than anything she had felt in a long time. The decision she had made earlier to fight was no longer just a passing thought. It was a commitment. She had lived through so much already, had been pushed to the brink of despair, but she was still here. She still had the strength to keep going.
And she wasn't going to let that go without a fight.
She took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, and then exhaled slowly. It was time. Time to make a move. Time to find a way out of this. The man had given her a glimpse of what was possible, but now it was up to her to take that first step. She knew it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be without danger or pain. But if she had learned anything during this journey, it was that nothing worth having ever came easily. The sound of footsteps broke the stillness, and her heart skipped a beat. She turned her head quickly, but there was no sign of the man. Instead, it was a group of her captors moving toward her camp. They were speaking in low tones, but their words were harsh and cold, their laughter ringing through the night air. She could feel a wave of panic rise within her, but she pushed it down. Fear wouldn't help her now.
She needed to think. She needed to act.
The sack still rested in her lap, and her hand instinctively reached for the knife. The cold metal felt steady against her palm, grounding her. She was ready. She had nothing left to lose, but that didn't mean she would go down without a fight. The men who had taken her thought she was weak, thought they could break her. They didn't know her. They didn't understand the strength she had inside. With one last look at the sack, she stood up, her legs shaking but determined. The night was still, the stars above bright and distant. It was a world that seemed so far removed from her reality, a world she had once known but now seemed foreign. But in that moment she realized something. The world was still hers to shape. She might have lost everything, but she still had herself. She still had the will to fight. The men were getting closer now, their voices louder. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, but she didn't let it overtake her. She had learned how to survive, how to move in silence when needed, how to be still when the moment called for it. She had lived through things others could not imagine, and she had done it with grace, with strength, and with the belief that someday, somehow, she would be free. Now was the time to act. She couldn't wait for someone else to save her. She had to save herself. With a knife in her hand, she moved quietly through the shadows, staying low to the ground, her body a part of the night itself. Her heart raced, her mind clear. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let fear control her. Not anymore. The men came into view, their silhouettes dark against the moonlight. They were laughing, unaware of the woman who was moving toward them, unseen and silent. She could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation building inside her. She was ready, but as she neared them, a sudden thought stopped her in her tracks. What if this wasn't the right time? What if there was another way? She could still hear the voices of her people in her mind, their teachings, their strength. She had learned the art of patience, the value of waiting for the right moment. She hesitated, watching the men, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her fingers tightened around the knife, her breath steady. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was in control. The men continued their conversation, unaware that she was just a few feet away, watching them. And in that moment, she realized something even more important. It wasn't about the fight. It wasn't about proving herself to them. It was about proving something to herself. With one final glance, she stepped back into the shadows, knowing that the time would come when she would make her move. But for now, she had made the first step. She had chosen to survive. The cold night air seemed to press against her skin, a constant reminder that time was slipping away. She had chosen to fight, to survive, and now she had to live with that decision. The weight of it felt like an anchor, but there was no turning back. She had spent so long feeling like a prisoner, trapped by circumstances beyond her control, but now she understood that she still had a choice. She still had a chance. Her fingers clenched around the knife in her hand as she crouched low in the shadows, observing the movements of her captors. The moonlight illuminated their figures, casting long shadows across the rocky ground, but it was their voices, harsh and mocking, that made her blood run cold. They were near now, close enough that she could hear every word, every laugh, every sound of boots scraping against the earth. The noise, their presence, seemed to fill the world with a sense of urgency, as if everything around her was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. For a moment she allowed herself to stop and listen, to let the sounds wash over her. The men were talking casually as if her fate was nothing more than a game, a simple matter to be settled. But to her, it was everything. It was her life, her future, her very identity. They didn't know her, didn't understand the fire that burned inside of her, the strength that had been passed down through generations of Apache women. They saw her as weak, as nothing more than a captive to be controlled. But she would show them otherwise. She had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. With a deep breath, she silently moved forward, her body moving in perfect harmony with the night. Each step was calculated, deliberate, the sound of her movements absorbed by the vast emptiness around her. She was like a shadow, a part of the night itself, slipping through the darkness unnoticed. Her heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't fear that made it beat faster. It was determination. She was in control now. She had made her choice, and she would not let fear take that away. The men had stopped speaking, and she could hear them shuffling around, unaware of the woman who was so close to them. Her mind was clear, focused. She knew this was her moment. She could feel the weight of the knife in her hand, the cool metal pressing against her palm. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for. It was her connection to her past, to her people, to the strength that had once been her birthright. She glanced up at the stars, the faint light of the moon casting a soft glow over the desert landscape. It felt strange, almost surreal, that in a moment so critical she could still see the beauty of the world around her. The desert was vast, empty, and yet it was full of life, just as she was. She was not yet ready to give up, not yet ready to let go of everything she had fought for, the people she had loved, the warriors who had stood beside her. They had all given her the strength to survive this far. She wouldn't dishonor their memory by giving up now. The men started moving again, their voices growing louder as they approached the campfire. They were getting closer. The tension in the air thickened, and her body tensed in response. Every muscle in her legs, every inch of her being was ready. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her breath was steady, calm, even as her heart raced. She was close now, so close she could almost reach out and touch them. They were scattered around the fire, laughing and joking as if there was nothing to fear. But there was something in their voices that made her blood run cold. They were talking about her, the Apache woman, the one who had been taken. Their words were cruel, filled with disdain, as they spoke about her as if she was nothing but a thing, a piece of property. But she was more than that. She had always been more than that. And now, in this moment, she was more than just a captive. She was a warrior. And warriors don't run. Warriors don't hide. Warriors fight until the very end. With a swift motion, she stood and moved toward the camp, her presence finally felt by the men around the fire. They turned quickly, their eyes wide with surprise. But there was no hesitation in her movement. She didn't stop to speak, didn't waste time with words. She was here for one reason: to take control of her fate. The men shouted in confusion, but their voices were drowned out by the sound of the woman's feet moving swiftly across the ground. She felt her body surge forward, fueled by the fire in her chest, the determination that had burned within her since the day she had been captured. She was done being their prisoner. She was done being a victim. She gripped the knife tightly, ready to defend herself. The first man lunged toward her, his hand reaching out to grab her arm, but she was faster. She spun out of his reach, ducking low and using the force of her movement to throw him off balance. He stumbled, and before he could recover, she had already moved on to the next one. She felt the sharpness of the knife against her palm, its blade glinting in the firelight. But she didn't let it distract her. Her focus was unwavering. Another man charged at her from the side, but she sidestepped him effortlessly, her body moving with a grace that surprised even her. She had spent so long in captivity, so long feeling weak and vulnerable, but now she felt a surge of power coursing through her veins. She wasn't the same woman who had been brought here months ago. She was different. She was stronger. And nothing could stop her now. The men seemed to be realizing slowly that she was not the helpless prisoner they thought her to be. But it was too late. She was in control. She was the one who decided what happened next. She darted between the men, each move calculated, each step taken with the knowledge that her survival depended on her speed and precision. She was quick, agile, a shadow in the night. The men, larger and stronger than her, tried to overpower her, but they didn't have the same fire she did. They didn't have the same will to survive, and in the end, that was what made the difference. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the men fell to the ground. She stood over him, panting heavily, her heart still racing in her chest. The fire crackled behind her, the only sound in the night. She had done it. She had fought back. She had survived. Her body ached, every muscle screaming from the effort, but she didn't let that stop her. She had made it this far, and now she would make sure no one could take her down again. She wouldn't let anyone control her. She was free. Finally, free. As she stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of what had just happened slowly sank in. She had fought for her life, for her freedom. And in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. She would never be anyone's prisoner again. The first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon, casting soft orange and pink hues across the desert landscape. The night, full of tension and struggle, seemed to have passed in the blink of an eye. But for the Apache woman, everything had changed. She had fought for her survival, taken control of her fate, and now she stood alone, feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the quiet stillness of the morning. She didn't know what came next. She had fought her captors, driven them back, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of victory. But what did it all mean? What would she do now? She had no home to return to, no people to turn to. Her tribe was lost, scattered, and the life she had once known was nothing but a distant memory. She was free, yes, but freedom came with its own set of questions and fears. She stood still for a moment, her breath steady, her gaze fixed on the rising sun. The warmth of the early morning sun touched her face, but it wasn't the warmth of comfort. It was the kind of warmth that spoke of beginnings, beginnings that were both uncertain and filled with possibility. She wasn't sure what path she would take, but she knew one thing: she was still alive. And for the first time in so long, she had the chance to shape her own future. Her mind drifted back to the fight that had taken place just hours before. The men who had captured her were no longer a threat, but the adrenaline from the battle still surged through her. She could feel the weight of the knife in her hand, the cool metal that had once been a tool for survival, now a symbol of her strength. It had been passed down through generations of Apache women, a reminder of the fierce resilience that ran through her blood. Holding it now, she felt connected to a long line of warriors, women who had fought, survived, and thrived against impossible odds. She had never imagined that she would have to fight like that. She had never imagined that she would be standing here alone, the silence of the desert surrounding her. But here she was, and the reality of it all began to sink in. The battle had been won, but the war wasn't over. Her survival was just the beginning of something much bigger. She glanced over at the campfire, the embers still glowing faintly, casting shadows across the sand. The fire was a symbol of the chaos she had just overcome, and yet it also represented something more. It was a reminder that she had made it through the night, through the struggle, and that now, in the quiet aftermath, she had the power to decide what came next. The Apache woman stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her body was tired, her muscles sore from the exertion, but there was a fire within her that wouldn't let her stop. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. She could hear the faint sound of the wind blowing across the desert, carrying with it the promise of a new day. But that promise came with uncertainty. What would she do now? Where would she go? The desert stretched out before her, endless and barren, a vast landscape filled with possibility but also danger. She had no map, no guide, only her instincts to rely on. She had always relied on her instincts, her inner strength, to survive, and that was exactly what she would do now. Her gaze shifted back to the sack she had carried with her through everything. The weight of it still felt significant, though the items inside were simple, nothing of great value in the eyes of others. But to her, it was everything. The beads, the cloth from her mother's shawl, the knife, all these things represented a connection to her past, to the woman she had been before the world had torn her apart. It was everything she had left. And in that sack, there was something more than just objects. There was the story of her survival. There was the story of her journey, of everything she had endured and overcome. She looked down at the sack, her hand resting on it, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from the absence of danger or struggle, but the kind that came from knowing that she had made it this far. She had fought for her life, had faced the worst of the world, and still she was standing. But peace, she realized, was fleeting. It wouldn't last forever. The world was still dangerous, still unpredictable. She had survived the night, but there would be more battles to face. The world around her wasn't forgiving. It wasn't a world that would let her rest for long. She had to keep moving. She glanced around, taking in the vastness of the desert. It stretched out before her, endless and unforgiving. But there was something about it, something about the way the sun was rising over the horizon that made her feel like it wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The beginning of something new. With a deep breath, she adjusted the sack over her shoulder and began to walk. She didn't know where she was going, but it didn't matter. She had learned long ago that survival wasn't about having all the answers. It was about taking the first step, even when you didn't know where the path would lead. The desert was harsh, and it would continue to be harsh, but it was also a place of freedom. a place where she could carve out her own future, where she could decide what kind of life she wanted to lead. She had been a prisoner for so long, but now she was free. And in that freedom she would find her own way. As she walked, her mind drifted back to the man who had helped her, who had given her that brief moment of hope when she had been ready to give up. She didn't know if she would ever see him again, but his words stayed with her. You have yourself. And sometimes that's all we need. She had taken those words to heart, and now they guided her as she moved forward into the unknown. The wind shifted again, and she felt the warmth of the desert sun on her skin. She could feel the road ahead, long and uncertain, but she also felt something else. She felt alive, and that was all she needed. She wasn't sure where the path would lead, but as long as she had herself, she knew she could face whatever came next. With each step, she felt stronger, more confident. The road ahead was unclear, but the fire inside her burned brighter than ever. She wasn't just walking through the desert. She was walking towards something. Toward freedom. Toward a future that was hers to shape. The desert stretched out before her, but now it didn't seem so vast, so empty. It seemed like a place of opportunity, a place where she could make her mark. She had survived, and now she would live. The journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid. The Apache woman walked forward, her steps steady, her heart strong, and her mind focused. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. She was free. And that in itself was enough.